You're listening to Weight Loss for Life Coaches, Episode 27, with Master Certified Life and Weight Loss Coach, Paige Bowman.
Welcome to Weight Loss for Life Coaches, the weekly podcast for coaches who are growing their coaching business and on their weight loss journey. Each week, we'll be tackling why weight loss feels hard and how to make hitting your weight loss goal the simplest thing you do all day. Hello, and welcome to the podcast. Today, we are going to talk all things food, the way you make decisions about food, and how being a scientist is so important when it comes to food. I got to thinking about how we individually decide what to eat on a daily basis and also what affects this decision. And when you work with as many people as I've worked with, you start to realize, if you didn't already know this, how different we all think about food and how really the many things that affect how we decide what to eat. And I want you to pause and think about the process that you go through when deciding what to eat for dinner, for example, or any meal really, but you probably kind of keep it surfacey, right? Like how I decide what's for dinner tonight is what's in the fridge and or what someone in the house is going to make for dinner. And that's what I'm going to have. But I want you to think about this, take it a step deeper. How did you decide that that kind of meal that you're going to have tonight is the kind of meal that's in your quote unquote library of meals? Where did that decision come from? Before we dive into food choices on your weight loss journey, I want us to step into that scientist observer brain first. And I want us to get curious about how we've come to the conclusion that these are the kinds of foods that we eat right now, and these are the kinds of food choices that we have made available to ourselves. So I'll use myself as an example. I eat meat, and I was thinking about that decision when I was thinking about this podcast. And where does that come from? Where does me being a meat eater come from? And I just go back to my family, right? My family, everyone, probably now that I sit and think about it, everyone in my family is a meat eater. No one is vegan or vegetarian in my family. So that comes more naturally in that I grew up in a family that eats meat. Of course, we also eat vegetables and other things, but I didn't grow up around even knowing that being a vegan or vegetarian was an option until maybe later in life. So when I sit and think about, well, why do I eat the way I do now? A lot of it has to do with how I grew up. And that is probably going to be the answer for most of us. If you listen to the Body Thoughts episode, you might notice a similar theme in that what I'm having us do is take an inventory almost of our past beliefs and thought process, our present, and then I'm also going to talk about the future a little bit. And that's what we kind of did with the body thoughts. And that's what I want you to think about when it comes to food as well, is where did this kind of meal, where did the idea of having cereal for breakfast come from? Where did the idea of being a meat eater come from? Where did the idea of maybe even being a vegan come from? I also got to talking to one of my current clients, and she's from the Midwest. And although I live in the South now, I'm from the Midwest. And there's a particular type of dinner that we eat in the Midwest, and that's meat and 2 sides of veggies. And those 2 sides are probably corn, potatoes, or green beans. And that's very a Midwest type of dinner. And I'm sure like other people eat that as well, but it's the corn and potatoes and pork chops or steak or something like that. That's a very Midwestern kind of meal. And so when I find that when I'm thinking about dinner and I'm thinking, what's my meat and what are my 2 sides, that is informed by the way I was raised and how we eat meals where I grew up. So when we're talking about food, first, we're getting curious with the kinds of foods that are naturally in our diet. And by diet, I mean the way we eat, and get curious about where that comes from. And if you've made changes since where you grew up, also like consider that. I know that I tend to eat way more vegetables and a more variety of vegetables than I did maybe when I was in college. I know growing up, I ate a lot of vegetables and then I stopped when I went on my own, and now I'm back at it again. And so first we let ourselves get curious. We're like, okay, these are the kinds of decisions I make around food. These are the kind of food choices I have in my lineup of food or in my library of meals. And this is where that comes from. So now let's talk about food choices in relation to your weight loss goal. And just as a side note, this is where it's important to get clear on your weight loss goal, your timeline, the kind of work you're going to do on your weight loss journey, and your method that you're going to go on or that you're going to try out, as we discussed in last week's episode, how to plan out your weight loss goal. So or your weight loss journey, I think is what I titled it. So if you haven't listened to that one yet, I would definitely listen to that one. We'll talk more about why this is important, but you want to be clear on what your goal is and what your timeline is to know kind of the way you might want to consider or reconsider your food choices and the foods that are in your current diet. And it's all going to depend on your goal. And not just your weight loss goal, but you could also consider, do you have a goal to lower your cholesterol levels, to add way more vegetables, to no longer eat meat, to no longer eat gluten, to build up your muscle strength? So it's those kind of goals you want to have in mind as we continue on this conversation. There were 2 times in the last 5 years, I would say, that someone introduced me to food choices and making changes to those food choices in relation to my weight loss goal on a more permanent basis. So the first time was when I did this nutrition program, and it taught me about going through phases in your diet. And again, by diet, I mean the way you're eating, not necessarily just to lose weight. What they taught me was to consider going through phases. So one phase being 3 weeks. The first phase might be a higher in fat kind of diet. So eating foods that are higher in fat, lower in carbs, and do that for 3 weeks. And then they would change up to a mainly vegetables only, no meat for 3 weeks. And that would be another phase. And then there would be another phase where you might add higher carbs, lower fat, and have that be a phase where you try out for 3 weeks. And so this nutrition program had you being a scientist, had you trying out new things, had you questioning your food choices and the way you made decisions around food that I actually really loved and has really informed a lot of what I do now and the way I think about things and the way I teach things, which is, of course, what we're talking about now, which is being the scientist, experimenting and questioning your choices and opening up to new ways of doing things. Another time that I was opened up to the idea of making changes to my food or questioning my food choices was when I started working with my coach, and she taught me about the effects of sugar and flour on the body and taught me that, sugar and flour affects your body, it affects your brain, it affects your urges, it affects your hormones. And so the way she taught it was to cut as much sugar and flour from your diet as possible. And she taught it to help your body, but also to lose weight. Now, I wasn't in a hurry, as I've talked to you all about in my 25-pound weight loss journey episode. I didn't want to make a bunch of changes really fast. I wanted to make permanent changes. I wanted to test out what people were telling me. And so I personally started decreasing the amount of those kinds of foods, the sugary and the foods made of flour, from my food lineup, so to speak. And so I took my time and I observed the effect that this change was having on my body and on my mind. And what I realized is that I did, in fact, like how I felt having less sugary things, less things made of processed flour or really processed foods in general. I liked how it felt in my body. I liked how much clearer my brain felt. I liked not having as many urges. So because I experimented with it and then I also observed it, I let it be a decision that I kept, not because someone told me to, but because I learned, I gathered data, and then I ended up agreeing with them. And I explain this part to you because that's the important part of this journey, not just listening to what people are telling you is right or wrong, as healthy or unhealthy, but picking a hypothesis or a method, like we talked about in last week's episode, and testing it out. Because think about this. Who decides what's healthy and what's not healthy? What's best for weight loss? What's not, right? There are so many opinions out there. That's why it's time to become a scientist and experiment and then evaluate. So we started with getting curious, and then we talked about taking in what people are telling you, or maybe just one person is telling you if you want to learn from one person, and then experimenting with it and evaluating it so that you can decide what changes you might want to make to your diet or your food choices, what you might want to eliminate, maybe permanently, maybe for the most part, what you might want to add in, and then owning that, taking responsibility for that as a decision that you've made. because you tested it out and then you implemented it and now you love that thing. The next thing I want you to consider is how important food choices are to your goal. I am personally of the belief that once you use a few basic tools, especially what I teach, which is the hunger scale, the 3 steps, and allowing urges or cravings, when you use those and you master them, you'll gain so much awareness around your eating habits and your food choices and how your body feels that you'll naturally start making better food choices according to what's best for your body. That's the theory that drove my 25-pound weight loss journey. And it's the theory that drives my one-on-one weight loss program. It's what I teach. So yes, I think your food choices matter, but in the context of your awareness of your body and the way you're making decisions around food, meaning, are you using your prefrontal cortex or your higher brain to make decisions around food, or are you using your primal brain or your lower brain to make decisions around food? I think that how you make your food choices matters as much as what your food is. I like the way my friend and fellow weight loss coach, the brilliant Laura Dixon, talks about food, and I'll link her in the show notes, her information. She says there are foods that serve you and foods that don't, and it's up to you to decide what goes in the categories. So for example, foods that serve you might be foods that you like, that feel good in your body, that help you to your goal, whatever your goal might be. And foods that don't serve you are foods that you don't like, foods that don't feel good in your body, and foods that don't serve your current goal. So for me personally, I've been working on lowering my digestive issues. And one of the things that helps is eliminating vegetables that they're called high FODMAP vegetables, whatever that stands for. But what I've learned is they tend to cause digestive issues, or they might cause it for some people. An example of what those vegetables might be are like cauliflower, broccoli, cabbage, mushrooms, onions. And so right now, those vegetables are on my foods that don't serve lists. I also don't like bananas. I don't know why, I can't explain it, but they are definitely on my foods that don't serve lists. Foods that do serve me are lots of fruits that feel good, like watermelons and peaches and cherries and blueberries. Vegetables that feel good, like lettuce and spinach and tomatoes and zucchini. What's also on my foods that serve list are ice cream and pizza because I like them and I just decide when to have them. Of course, I plan them in advance and I eat to satisfied when I eat those things. So those things are on my foods that serve list. So that's just another way of thinking about food choices, foods, and the way you make decisions around food. I bet you thought when you started this episode that I would get on here and tell you what foods to eat or not. If you thought that that's what would happen, you haven't been listening to me for long enough because I am not in the business to tell you what to do. This podcast and the way I lead and teach is to help you become the scientist and gain awareness, and then own and take responsibility for the decisions you make so that no matter what you do, it gets to be your journey. So here are some powerful questions for you to think about beyond this episode. How do I decide what kinds of foods I eat or don't eat? How does my future self think about her food choices? And what are the foods that serve me right now? And what are the foods that don't? All right, that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed our conversation about food today, even if we didn't talk about food that much at all. If you love this episode, leave us a rating on your favorite podcast platform and share this with others. And if you want help becoming the scientist on your journey, making it your journey, and then becoming masterful at owning your choices while you get to your weight loss goal, I can help you. Reach out to me and let me know you're interested in working one-on-one together, and we'll schedule your consult call. You can email me at hello@paigebowman.com or message me on Instagram at lifecoachpaigeb. All right, that's it for today. See y'all next week.